Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Hope that you're doing well. We're here recording on a Friday, gearing up for our weekend. And we have kind of a special episode today, going to do something a little different. We're going to talk a little bit about you, Roy, and your history. And I will preface it by saying, I asked Roy to do this. I want our listeners and people who support CH to know a little bit about you and your history and kind of the path that God has had you and Karen on, and how you've gotten to this point where you've come all the way to the good life and you live
promised
in
land. As I shared the
Nebraska.
vision banquet,
Yes.
as I shared the vision banquet last fall, the promised land.
Yep. So that's what we're going to do. So it's going to be a little different, but I do hope if you're listening or watching, it'll just give you a better picture of Roy and his leadership here at CH. I mean, I'll just start by saying, and I'm not just saying this because Roy, like, I report to Roy, he's my boss, but like, he's probably one of the, I mean, you are the best boss I've ever had. And I think you have tremendous leadership qualities, and we'll get into that. But a part of that is because you lead so collaboratively. You just have such a pastoral heart. And I really hope that comes across here as people watch and listen, so that they can have confidence in it. Who's leading CH? Well, it's Roy, but it's also Roy and his whole team. And you've built quite a team. And of course, I'm biased because I'm here, but I think it's one of the best teams in Nebraska in terms of the diversity of perspectives and experiences and age and background. And so I that's a reflection of you. So
I appreciate that, James.
Thanks. Yeah. I appreciate you.
I agree. Yeah. I agree.
And I would just say,
if we get a chance, we could talk about even how our relationship started, which I think, is emblematic of, my heart for ministry.
Yep.
And so, I can't wait to talk about some of that.
Yep.
I think is, why we're really excited about the future of Christian Heritage, why I'm excited about the future of the work we do.
I agree. Well, the other side of that I'll mention is, you don't like doing this kind of thing because you don't like talking about yourself. And that's totally legitimate. So, I mean, do you want to start there and just like, this is, you're not the center of attention kind of person. And so it could be a little uncomfortable to just talk about your life publicly like this, but yet you do understand why it's important. So just talk about that.
Yeah.
And just share your heart there.
Yeah. I think, maybe it's because of the field, right? So when you look at, I probably I still have a hard time recognizing how old I am. So I still struggle with that a little bit. But when I think that I've been in the field, working with at-risk families and youth at some level for the last 30 years, I think part of that for me is so many experiences have radically shaped my life, my heart, the losses, the grieving, the lack of control. And so I'm very outcome oriented. So at the end of the day, I don't want to make it about, me. I want to make it about the collectiveness of the community and all the people involved that it takes. It's not one person, right? So I think of, football analogy, it's, we could talk about the critical nature of the quarterback, but I don't care how good your quarterback is. If you don't have the right schemes, you don't have the right role players, you don't have, all of those things go into what really sets up everyone really well for success. And so, although I would say as the CEO, I'm the quarterback, I cannot do it without the right scheme, the right strategy, the right coaches, the right players who are really executing it and implementing that. That is ultimately what I want to highlight. It's not the role that I play, although I play a critical role, but it is, my ability to draw everybody together, being single-minded around what goal are we after and how do we work really well together. So I think that gets to more of the heart of, my leadership style, which is I try to be a servant leader to the best of my ability. But it really is, if we're not achieving better outcomes for kids, like at the end of the day, it really is, it's more about the kids. It's the families that we work with. That's really the priority than it is the work that we do. And I think Jesus modeled that beautifully. I mean, Jesus came, and what did he do? I'm here simply doing the will of my Father.
Yep.
Jesus did not make it about him. He made it about obviously having a relationship with him, but he was like, I'm here to do the will of my Father. I'm here to accomplish his will for us, the redemption of humankind and mankind. And obviously he was the vehicle by which he did that. But he talked often about, what a servant was. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. And he modeled for us that. And I take that very seriously.
You do.
So
You do. 100% you do. Well, tell us just a little bit about your upbringing, where you're from. People know you're from Pittsburgh. You're a huge Pirates, Steelers, and Penguins fan, Pitt Panthers. Like you love Pitt. But tell us about growing up in Pittsburgh, your family, and then into college, and kind of what got you interested in, serving kids and families.
Yeah. So born and raised in Western Pennsylvania, in the 70s, right? So if you're going to be a football fan,
what a time to be in Pittsburgh.
It was a great time to be a Steelers fan, the Steel Curtain. And, I was, in elementary school going into middle school. So that was a great time to kind of latch on. Kind of a cool story. So our next door neighbor, she was the mother-in-law for Chuck Tanner, who was the baseball coach for the 70, the Pirates. And so just really close to the sports and black and gold. And so that was just a really great time. When you're winning, it's a great time to be a fan, to be quite honest. So it's kind of seared into you for life.
Yep.
But yeah, so born in Western Pennsylvania, very blue collar family. My mom, was a secretary at our school district. My dad was kind of a janitor and bus driver at our school district. So very blue collar. I was the first one to really kind of go to college in our family. But I was 16 actually when I accepted Christ at a youth camp. Now, I've been raised in the family. My parents came to know Christ. So my parents were kind of first generation Christians and kind of figuring things out. In fact, my dad, if you ask my dad today, he often talks about, I remember, son, when I gave my life to Christ and I gave up alcohol. So one of those earliest memories I actually have of my dad is actually sitting at a bar with my dad.
Wow.
But we laugh about this now. It's like, I came home, I accepted Christ. I was pouring the alcohol down the sink and I was like, Dad, why don't you give that to somebody? Like you're wasting. I was probably, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years of old age at the time. So no context.
Yep.
But they're modeling that for me. In fact, when I was in 9th grade, my parents actually, our youth pastor left. We attended a Christian and Missionary Alliance church, and my parents became the youth leaders, right? And so they just kind of stepped in, and I think they modeled for me what that see a need, fill a need, and that was kind of my parents. Accepted Christ at a youth camp when I was 16. And I think that moment has really is the more that I reflect on that now, which is really crazy to think about. It's been 40 years since I accepted Christ, James. 40 years this year. And so I think there was a phrase at the camp.
So you accepted Christ in 1984.
I did.
I was born in 1984.
Okay.
So you became born again when I was born. Which is kind of cool.
Yeah. That is kind of cool.
All right.
That is cool.
All right, cool.
That's neat.
Great.
Another thing that we have in common, James.
Yes.
But it was at that camp. I had a unique experience. I like how far do we want to go into this? But when I was at camp,
this is a great story. I think you should share this.
So when I was at camp, so I always kind of I probably accepted Jesus 40, 50 different times. The communion plate is passed. Hey, or you don't take the elements if you don't know Jesus. Okay, I don't know if I know him, but I'm going to do it because it's what you do.
Yep.
But when I was at camp, I was playing football and I actually got an injury at camp. And I lost the feeling. It was a pinched nerve, but when you're 16, you don't understand any of that. But I lost feeling in the left side of my body, and so I was just scared to death. And when I was laying in the camp unit, the nurses unit,
Yeah.
thinking, oh
The
my
injury
gosh,
tent.
like
Yep.
it really changed, my perspective of God just really grabbed a hold of my
Mm.
heart while there. And at camp, it was such a powerful, like a revival broke out at camp.
Mm.
So literally the pastor didn't even need to get up in front of the camp. He
Wow.
started, he's like, there was so much life change going on that kids, he just opened up the podium and kids are coming up and just saying, man, this is where I was. This is where I'm at. Like, give your life to Jesus. And like everyone was giving their life to Jesus. It was kind of a neat experience for me. But there was a sign inside the chapel that says, Lord, here am I, send me. And that became a very personal mission statement, I think, to me at the time. Now that I see that and I look at the course of my life now, the last 40 years, the different states, the different vocations, all of that has really been is like, man, God branded upon my heart at that moment. I didn't know
Mhm.
what that meant, but I look back on it now and that has probably defined my life is, Lord, my life is not mine.
Yep.
It's yours. And I will go wherever you lead. So,
Yep.
and I
Now
went to Nyack College. So
I
after
see it.
high school, I took the SAT once. Like my goal was not actually to go to college. I wanted to become a Navy SEAL. There's a whole story to that, which I know the odds of becoming a Navy SEAL were slim to none. But anyways, that door closed that weekend. That door closed for me. Someone from Nyack College just happened to be
Huh.
in the area, and next thing I know, I'm going to Nyack College in the fall of 1986. I'm headed off to Nyack and graduated there from 91. And
And
that gave me,
Nyack is a Christian and Missionary
yeah,
Alliance
CNMA. Actually,
college.
it's no
Yep.
longer. It just closed its
Oh,
doors
did it really?
after
Okay.
about 140 years. It closed its doors last year. It was very sad, very
Yeah.
sad to see that.
Shoot.
But you went to a Christian college, and my life was
And what'd you
continued
get
to
your
radically
degree in?
change there. So I got my degree in social science. Actually wanted to become a youth pastor, but I didn't want to get
Traditional
a
Bible degree.
traditional
Yep.
pastor degree. And so took a lot of classes in social science. I was very involved in like outreach teams. So I actually would go down to New York City. And I did ministry in the World Trade Centers while they were still there.
Wow.
I played basketball with kids underneath the Brooklyn Bridge, did Bible studies in some of the projects down there, did street ministry in Chinatown.
Hmm.
So that experience of being, the farmlands of, Western Pennsylvania to beginning to see another side of life in New York City.
Yep.
A lot of those seeds, now that I look back, were being planted in my life in college.
Now, one of the things you talked about, at least here with our leadership team and people at CH, is, I mean, you wanted to be a pastor
It did.
for most of your life, and you've said this. God's just never really opened that door for me. So talk about that a little bit, because I think that's fascinating. I think I've been a pastor, and of course known a lot of pastors, and I think when someone has that desire, everyone else is like, oh, that's amazing, that's a great thing, I'm sure God will give you that. But that hasn't been the case, where you're like, God hasn't given you that opportunity. So,
Yeah.
how have you experienced and processed like this was a dream, and maybe it still is. And I think you've even said like, maybe someday, when I'm old
Maybe
and
someday.
gray, I'll serve in a church and help as a pastor. But kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, I would say if someone asked me, so I turned 56 this year, and I'm no spring chicken.
Yep.
If someone asked me, like, when did you, like, some people have asked me, it's like, when did you know you wanted to be a CEO of a, foster care agency? Or
Yeah.
when I was a camp director in New Hampshire, like, when did you know? I'm like, dude, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
Yeah.
That's always been my heart.
Yep.
I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it's my story.
Mhm.
But I've always had a desire to minister to others. And I think that's always been a big part of that. And I think back in the 80s, right, late 80s, early 90s, that was vocational ministry. I think we look at a way I look at ministry today is very differently. Like you don't have to be ministering to others simply by being a missionary, being a pastor. But that was really a big thing. I think my understanding of that late 80s, early 90s. So I wanted to be a youth pastor. I had a lot of work with youth and had a heart for youth, and like, well, what better way to do that? I had my minor in Bible, my degree in social science. But there were just lots of different doors that were closed for me.
Yep.
I looked at becoming a youth pastor through the CNMA. That door closed for me. And I won't get into all the details of that. As I've experienced different career changes, I've looked at, becoming a pastor. Even recently, after leaving camp in New Hampshire and coming to Christian Heritage, and how all of that transpired, I'm like, I don't even know if I want to be a CEO anymore. So I
Mhm.
remember, getting my resume together. You know, a discipleship pastor, families ministry pastor. Like, you think about all of my skills, like I could do these jobs. I felt like really well. Um, I don't have I don't have a typical seminary degree and lots of work with inside the church. So I think I'm not, people probably look at my resume and like, yeah, he's not the guy we're looking for.
Mhm.
So I think those are lots of different reasons, but I think God's like, it's not where I have you.
Yep.
But like, and that's why I appreciated your words when we start off. If someone knows me, gets to know me, they will see that I just have a heart for others.
Yep.
And I love shepherding people. I love
Yep.
discipling people. I love mentoring people. And I don't do that by, hey, I have it all figured out. Is like, just, I want to come alongside you and help you process, think, figure things out, empower you to do all that. So I have a pastoral heart
Yep.
for people. So anyways, yeah. So hopefully
Yeah.
that was a good answer.
Thanks for sharing that. So let's kind of double click on the helping people.
Yep.
You know, at CH and in the podcast here, we talk a lot about trauma and how it impacts the negative behaviors in our life.
Right.
But on the positive side, like what were those things that made you say, "Hey, I do want to help people. I want to go to Bible college. I want to major in social science, which is about people. I'm was it going to camp? Was it your parents? What were some of those early
Yeah.
experiences that really led you to make those kind of choices in your
Man.
life?"
I would say part of it is probably I think what my parents were modeling for me. And by the way,
Mm.
anyone who knows my dad and my mom, we're not the most, we're, I don't know, gracefully dysfunctional as a family. I have a younger brother, Scott, and he's also kind of in the mental health services field in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania. So I think part of that was just modeled through our parents. I remember taking in a young lady when we were even in high school who,
Wow.
probably was in the foster care services
Yep.
and didn't have a lot of people. And we took her in, and, the messiness, but the beautiful part of that too. And man, there's a whole story to that as well. But I think that's probably those inner workings, that foundation being laid in my parents' life through us. And then I just think as I started doing life and I saw the brokenness around me, um, I think of John Lewis, who is one of
Mhm.
the freedom riders, and
Yep.
if not me, then who? If not now, when?
Hmm.
So I think that verse again, "Here am I, Lord, send me," was always kind of impressed on having compassion and empathy for those who are experiencing difficulties in
Yeah.
life.
Yep.
Um, and I probably did. I mean, I have a lot clarity on that now than I did then when I was in my mid-20s. But after graduating from college, I got my first real job out of college was I worked at a city rescue mission, and I was working the food bank and giving spiritual counseling to those who
Wow.
needed food and clothing. It was my first job. Moving to New York, and eventually I got a job at a rehabilitational treatment facility, James. I mean, that experience there was transformative
Yep.
for me as I was working with adjudicated and foster care youth from the 5 boroughs of New York City. I
Hmm.
was working in Bronx and Harlem and Brooklyn in the projects. I mean, and I was a white guy in the mid
Yep.
90s.
Yep.
Did God transform my understanding of poverty, of racial discrimination?
Yeah.
So just seeing that and how transformative that became for my own faith.
Yep.
Um, that really became the foundational elements and aspects of my life.
It's
Um,
good.
and then, ultimately got married. Karen and I had been married 28 years. And I think as we were married, for a couple of years when we were living in the New York area, ultimately both of us sensed the call, and God did phenomenal, like opened the Red Sea for us to get to ultimately where we became house parents at a residential school in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And we did that for close to 10 years and had 70 plus girls go through our home. So
Mm.
it was those early years of out of college, working with some of the most riskiest at-risk behaviors and families and of youth, and then becoming house parents and, raising girls if they were our own.
Yeah.
Man, like an incredible foundation for, the rest of our lives.
Yep. I want to talk about being house parents in a minute, but first, I think it's what you just talked about and living in New York City. Like when we hear, so I'm Midwesterner. I've lived in another country. I've lived in other parts of this country, but I'm still a Midwesterner, right? You cannot take the Midwestern out of the boy. And so when a Midwesterner hears Bronx, Harlem, Brooklyn, we're just like, oh, gangs, gunshots,
Yeah.
bank robberies, 7-Eleven robberies. We just think of the worst things in the world, right? And we know that's not true.
Right.
But we do know in bigger cities, there are significant problems, just like there are in small communities.
Right.
But they get blown up because here in the Midwest, we are, and I'll just admit it, we're fairly isolated. And so I just think it's a blessing that someone like you who's had those experiences and is not from here is serving here, because you do add a unique perspective that most Midwesterners don't have. Like I'm really glad for my experience in South Africa, where we saw extreme poverty.
Right.
Unlike what I've ever witnessed in the United States. So that helps me. But again, I'm still that Midwesterner. And so I'm like, well, okay, what goes on in the Bronx shouldn't happen in Nebraska, but it does. And so I just think you add that level of perspective that you can't get unless you live there. And so as you talk about poverty, racial discrimination, and all the issues that a large city like New York deals with, it's good for us to have a quote unquote outsider here to add, like, what do we need? We need fresh eyes. We need someone who doesn't see it like we see it.
Well, and to be honest with you, I think, if anything, so from New York to Pennsylvania to Colorado to New Hampshire, really, all of those experiences, really what lesson has that taught me? What has taught me is I need to know who I'm actually serving. In every area, there's commonalities to it, but there definitely are unique things. I would even say the difference between Lincoln and Omaha can feel like night and day as well, as we think about the challenges of that. I think if all those experiences have taught me is I need to slow down. I don't have all the answers, but getting the right people to the table, having the right conversations is we can really, I need to provide the right space to have the right conversations. We need to ask the right questions so we can get to the right, the desires that we desire to get. And an outsider sometimes can come in. I'm going to come in and be the answer. I'm going to be the knight in shining armor. That really isn't like, that's not my heartbeat at all. Cause I could do more damage than good. So my goal is how do I leverage and understanding our assets and resources in a way that I can help mobilize and galvanize what actually are those needs. So I think, yes, I hope I bring some of those experiences to it, but what I really hope is what I've learned in my leadership.
Yep.
And, through my failures and through my successes of what I can help be a benefit to Christian Heritage, where I think there's unprecedented change happening right now in Nebraska and foster care, all of those kinds of worlds and I'm seasoned too, right? So it's just like, it takes a lot to get me to a place where I'm not feeling like been here before. Even if I haven't been there before, I'm like, God's been good. He got us through. He got me through all of that. He can get me through this. And I would say this too. I think, when I was at Edwin Gold Academy, so the residential treatment facility, it was some of those experiences that I had there that really have become the why in my life. So let me just one story in particular. So one young man, we still connect every once in a while on Facebook, and I love connecting with him. But he was in the foster care system. He was actually at a police officer's house in Queens. just exhibiting some really kind of anti-social behavior, some high at-risk behaviors. He came into our facility, which, we were located about 30 miles north of the George Washington Bridge. And he came in, and eventually myself and then his caseworker in New York, we were able to find his mom.
Hmm.
And I remember the day before we were going to go see his mom, and I went back into his room, and he's just a mess, and he was not coping well. And I just remember sitting down, this really hardened kid, and just saying, like, what if she doesn't want me? What if she, yeah, he probably doesn't remember all the circumstances that led to that. And just being
Yeah.
able to be this kid, this kid from New York City and this white kid from Western Pennsylvania. And in that moment, I was just able to come alongside him. And I think that has been transformative, I think, not only in my life, but in his life as well. And it didn't get any easier after that. But, that experience broke my heart. It helped me look beyond not just the color of our skin and our gender and all of that is, our basic humanity was, here was just a scared kid who really didn't know about his relationship with his mom. And in that moment, God gave me the privilege and honor to just speak life and truth in his life.
Yeah.
And it's those kinds of experiences. And I have hundreds of those stories that really have helped me, has shaped me, but
Sure.
helps me stay centered on really what's at stake, into the important work that I think God has called me to do, but I think what he's